This is the unrestricted free agent.
Welcome into the program. Glad you're here. And I just pulled my microphone completely off the table.
I think South Carolina's catching Clemson. I really do.
Defense, I'm going to tell you right now, they're nasty. They're going to be nasty all year.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
Who knows what's real and what's not even anymore?
When you see black and white and you're calling it purple, I got problems with that.
And LT, I told you, it's all about the tear talk.
How about that for a start? Thursday morning, welcome in. Time for a little sip of coffee. That's where I'm at this morning. What about you guys? Apologize for being a couple minutes late here. Everything actually working right from a technical standpoint, so no excuses. No excuses. All on me. See a bunch of you guys already just waiting to get in. Not even waiting to get in. I should say DC. 6:30 this morning. First one. Anthony. Good morning, UFAs, as always. Jason in early as well. Roger, sunny outlook. RL representing the Gamecocks with the emojis and the good morning. Picks in for the UFAs. Greetings. DC already coming in with a hot take, too. Pete Lembo now turning into my favorite coordinator on the Gamecock football staff. Yesterday's press conference was a must-watch. Talking about Kai Kroger, the punter, says Kai's a specialist, but he's not a specialist. I was fascinated to see that comment. That it reminds me of the end of the Will Muschamp era, unfortunately. Especially doing it on radio with my buddy Bill Gunter, and we just play something sometimes on there, and you can just see the first sound of his voice, and Bill is just like head down, just almost in an angry place. Just the first sound of the voice, and it'd feel like the exact opposite with Pete Lembo, right? He could have said nearly anything in yesterday's press conference, and I think most Gamecock football fans would be like, I don't like that guy. 2 punt blocks for touchdowns will do that. But we will let you see and hear, or just hear if you're only listening to this on the Podbean live stream this morning. But if you're with us at Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, you can see and hear from Pete Lembo coming up in just a minute. But speaking of that, nice and clear this morning, since you guys are the senior engineers on the show as well. I'm assuming, since no complaints have popped in yet, that loud and clear. I'm hoping you're hearing us loud and clear, hearing me loud and clear this morning. But this football season is here in a big way, I can tell, because Thursday morning just pops up. Boom. It comes much quicker than previously. Yeah, I'm going no hat today, Chris. I don't know. I got one beside me. Depends how much the hair bugs me. Roger says, Pete Lembo. Slightly muffled, Chris. Thank you. He's not only a good coordinator, he's valuable in that he's been a head coach before. Helps to have someone who's been there where the buck stops, even though it was at a different level. Well, at Elon, that was, I think, the second head coaching stop, I believe, is up in Ohio as well. Yeah, well, especially when your head coach is a first-year head coach, is a first-time head coach, even though he's the son of a Hall of Famer, so a little bit different. But why don't we start with Pete Lembo, right? I mean, why wouldn't we start there this morning? Where this was a really interesting take, I thought, yesterday. And you can't ask for a better situation as a special teams coordinator to come in several days after your team just blocked a couple of punts was the main reason that your SEC team handled a Sun Belt team in the season opener. And coming into week number 2 on the road in the SEC against Arkansas, the reputation that South Carolina special teams has earned just off of this specifically, where you got some national pub, forget who said it, one of the national college football writers mentioning Pete Lembo specifically, the early favorite to win the Frank Broyles Award for assistant coach in college football of the year because of the 2 punt blocks for touchdown. But interesting take from Pete Lembo on that and what is happening not just from a special team standpoint, but it also kind of gave me a window, a peek into kind of the entire program philosophy under Shane Beamer. Here's Pete Lembo, Gamecock special teams coordinator.
I love the fact that we are building something here and that everybody involved in our program, because I believe very much like Shane that this is a very inclusive, not exclusive program. We want everybody who wants to be a part of this thing to feel like they're a part of this thing. So we obviously have a head coach who's very easy to get to know and very approachable, and I'd like to think I'm very much the same way. And so if we are building something here that is taking on a life of its own, like Coach Beamer did at Virginia Tech for all those years, then that's awesome. And that makes it all that much more exciting for me to come to work every day, for our staff to be involved with this. And not that I have a lot of time to read a lot of quotes from our players, but our players are starting to really get excited about this stuff. When you have freshmen coming in and they're talking about it, and you have fifth-year seniors who may not even be on it who are talking about it, it's starting to take root, right? And that's what we want.
How about that? Did you hear that inclusive, exclusive part? I thought that was part of what was the most interesting of that. Also the fact, and I would just assume that from a special teams coordinator, you have some success. You were with Shane Beamer. Beamer ball was the gold standard in college football special teams. You say, hey, yeah, we're moving towards that direction. This is a good thing. But the inclusive part, I thought that was really fascinating because I've never heard it put that way. But hearing that makes me think, oh, yeah, this coaching staff, Shane Beamer knew exactly the environment, or if he didn't know it, he figured it out real quick, where Gamecock fans felt they were on the outside, very much on the outside in the Will Muschamp era, and then how they've embraced it in a big way. Just getting the text message in, by the way, that Perry Orth going to hop on with us in just a few minutes. Texting back now. It was originally scheduled for 8:30. We're doing it a little early. Looks good. Former Gamecock quarterback giving us some expertise, and can't wait to hear his thoughts, because we heard from Corey Miller yesterday. Gamecock legend, right? Longtime New York Giant, knows all about being a linebacker, defensive end type, was breaking it down, saying that, hey, man, offensive line shouldn't be having the issues they're having. And we'll hear from offensive coordinator Marcus Satterfield, his press conference yesterday as well. Plenty of interesting stuff. But he's talking about when defensive guys are coming at them, they should be able to switch off, and it shouldn't be as difficult as it's looking, as it has been for the Gamecock offensive line. Well, I get that. I've tried to take everybody's perspective into account when I'm listening to their comments. Like when I listened to, who was it? Was it Greg McElroy doing one of the games over the weekend? Yeah, it was McElroy. I think he might have been doing the Florida State LSU game Sunday night. I believe that was it, right? And anytime a ball could have been caught, McElroy made sure to point that out. He's a former quarterback, right? I'm guessing former wide receivers were watching that game and saying, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's sounding like a quarterback. Those catches are much more difficult than he's making them sound like they are. Former defensive player, you've always been going up against massive human beings on the offensive line. You say, yeah, those guys should be able to handle it. So I think that's it's just naturally going to be part of our own perspectives, right? Where we're coming from. For those of us who didn't have near the athletic ability of Greg McElroy or Corey Miller or Perry Orth and never played SEC football or anywhere close most of the time, we come at it from the frustrated fan standpoint and just the zoomed out bird's eye view and say, oh, what's going on here? Right? How does an SEC, and Corey almost said this verbatim actually yesterday, you're an SEC offensive lineman, you should be able to push around Sunbelt guys. I think from his perspective, though, he played before Carolina was even in the SEC. Sunbelt to that generation is a much different thing than what it is now. I think that's a fair statement. That Coastal Carolina is a great example, right? They're not. I mean, I was going to say they're not your grandfather's Coastal Carolina, but they didn't play football then, right? It just is different now. The gap certainly a lot closer than it used to be, but that's another part of the frustration, right? SEC football still is the pinnacle of college football. And you still, as an SEC offensive lineman, should handle a Sun Belt team, should be able to control the offensive line of scrimmage, the defensive line of scrimmage, a little bit more than Carolina did the other night. And it came up. Good morning to you, Kens and Hope and Anthony. I'm a failure. Thank you for bringing this up. The episode of Welcome Home last night was amazing, he says. Showed how our fan base is there for our boys. It failed last night after bedtime with my 3 boys. 8-ish. I think we got them down last night, so not bad. Go to turn on the press conferences to catch up for the day, and I made it through Marcus Satterfield and halfway through Pete Lembo and crashed. And so I was up early this morning catching up on those. Didn't get a chance to watch that last Welcome Home episode. That's on my agenda for today. I'll give you my take on that coming up tomorrow. Good to hear that it was a good one. But I assumed it would be when you got Sandstorm, when you got a win in the first game, when you're wrapping up the 5-show series. Chris says, I forgot about it again last night. Okay, I'll try not to spoil it to you too much tomorrow. I'm guessing it should be on Gamecocks Plus, I would imagine, now that thing is launched, but I don't know for sure. No clue. But was going to get to, I think, the most interesting part of Marcus Satterfield's press conference yesterday, where this was not even 5 minutes in, I don't think. And Satterfield opened up. I think one of his first answers was talking about issues that they need to clean up. And then he mentioned this specifically, or he brought this up all by himself. Here's Carolina's offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield.
Sat, you mentioned fixing some issues. What are some things that you and the rest of this offensive staff are kind of harping on as you get into Arkansas week?
Well, not attitude. Our attitude's been unbelievable. Our practice has been really good this week. I'm sure, like the elephant in the room, like we have to run the football. We have to be able to block people. We have to be able to block movement. We have to be able to, function in space. And it's not just the offensive line. It's, all I've heard about is the offensive line, which had its own struggles. But, we got our butts kicked on the perimeter. And we knew that Georgia State was going to do a bunch of different stuff and moving around and made it, just the reason that they got Tennessee a couple years ago and the reason they played Auburn well. So we knew we were going to have to get the ball on the perimeter, and we got whipped on the perimeter. So that's a huge emphasis for us. We went a couple, live periods on the perimeter this week just to prepare us and sharpen us up and get us to where we need to go.
Wildly interesting to me in so many ways. Got your butts kicked and got whipped on the perimeter against Georgia State, I think is hugely concerning to Carolina football fans, especially knowing what you're up against the next couple of weeks. Maybe it's how coaches speak. Maybe we should have expected that more than we did. I don't know. But I'm glad we got a much more qualified voice to talk about that on the program en route this morning. Perry Orth joining us on the road. Perry, where are you headed, man? Or is this to an undisclosed location that you can't let everybody know?
No, I'm heading to work. It's funny how things stack up throughout the day, so I thought I'd hop on a few minutes early and talk a little football with you.
Great, man. Much appreciated. Hope you're doing well. I know Colin Ball plays at Cardinal Newman. You got a guy 6 touchdowns on Friday night?
Yeah, we did. One of the most valuable lessons I learned when I was at AC Flora is the now head coach, Ken Floyd. He used to tell me all the time that very few people can actually teach the box, and the box is the offense and defensive line. And, with me having Corey Helms as head coach, and, he calls himself the head coach, but he's really my offensive line coach. No, I'm just kidding. No, but he does a great job with the kids. And, we kept getting a very favorable look in the run game, and we stuck with it. And, scored 42 the first week, 58 last week, and trying to keep it rolling.
Woo, that's calling some ball plays right there. How is it the first time being the guy that gets to call the plays?
Oh, it's awesome, man. It's so fun. But I'll tell you, as a play caller, you're only as good. You're really only as good as the players that you have. Scheme is great, but watching the film from Friday's game, there were a lot of run plays that I called that really weren't there. But running back making people miss and guys making really, really key blocks to spring the running back free. You can only do so much as a coach, but at the end of the day, I actually really respected this. Coach Muschamp used to say it all the time. This is a player's game, and you can X's and O it up all you want and get kids mentally ready to go, but they're the ones that actually have to go out and do it. So we try to have fun, but we also try to coach them and do it the right way.
Well, let's transition that to Gamecock football, shall we? With an interesting offensive performance. I think it was an interesting first game. Always it will be from a Gamecock perspective. But to win that thing comfortably, but to do it and get outgained by Georgia State, to be doubled from the a run game perspective where Georgia State averaged 5 yards per carry and Carolina was 2.5. What do you make of game number one overall? And then we'll get into some more specifics, I guess.
Yeah, I thought the offense was going to come out a little bit more spread and trying to throw it. Now, Georgia State on film could have given really good run looks, so you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. This is me speaking from a fan's perspective. We want to see Rattler sling the ball all over the field. But yeah, I think that special teams played great defense. I mean, Georgia State, they did have 5 yards of carry. They ran it every play, basically. I thought the defense played phenomenal. I think they only gave up 300 yards and some change. Offensively, I think we did some good things. I think, a couple of those turnovers, I know Rattler he probably wishes he'd have back. But, the Georgia State threw everything at us that they possibly could. And it's hard because, you sit there and you prep for a game all off season expecting to see a certain look. Well, you get out to the actual game and the look is different than what you've been practicing. You're seeing different blitzes. You're seeing different numbers. You're seeing different, all sorts of different things. And it can kind of throw you off from an offensive standpoint. And because it's still early, a lot of offenses are still working on kind of grooving together. And so it just takes time. Now, I won't be able to use those same excuses in 3 or 4 weeks, right? But we hope that offensive unit will progress. And unfortunately, they don't really have, the next 2 games are not 2 teams that you want to try to progress against, right? You got to strap it up and play football, because if not, then you'll lose. But hey, that's the nature of this conference, and that's why the kids come to play here and the coaches come to coach here.
So what can you see in week number 2 that would show progress? Is it just the obvious things? You run the football better? You're a little bit more consistent in the passing game?
Yeah, my offensive philosophy, it really stems a lot from the way I was coached in high school and in college. And I run to open up the pass. Now, if the run's working, I'm going to ride it, but I'm going to run to open the pass up. I want to spread you out as best as I can. I'm an 11 personnel guy. I like the 1 tight end and one running back. I want to try to spread you out and then run at you and get the numbers that we want to run it. But I also like to throw the football down the field, and that's not launching deep balls and deep posts every play, but throwing corner routes, throwing those cover 2 post routes right in the middle of the field, throwing dig routes, throwing curl routes, seam routes, stuff like that. I think that would help us from a South Carolina standpoint in the run game as well, just loosening them up a little bit. And then, I think I talked about it last year, you got two different types of run games. You've got the zone run game and then the gap scheme run game, which is gap scheme is, you're blocking double teams and pulling somebody around like a power or a counter. Then zone, you have, outside zone where you're trying to get outside, inside zone where you're double teaming, working to the linebackers. But when you play really good defenses, Those defensive line are bears, man. They're hard to push, and sometimes it can be a struggle working to the next level. But it'll be interesting to see what we do different. I know that we did a lot of both at the end of the season, and we saw a great improvement in the run game. I'll be interested to see how they come out and play versus Arkansas. Arkansas on the back end, just from watching them last year, they run some different things. Like they line up with 3 safeties back, and I'm almost positive they play with an odd front. So there's 3 down, they got 3 in the back, so they got 5 underneath, and they really just try to keep everything in front. And it's a Barry Odom defense, so they're going to be good. They're going to be well coached and disciplined. We're going to have to execute and take what the defense gives us, if we want to go out and score the points that we did. Cincinnati had some success on them last week. And I think that we can always take a few things from the week previous, put that in our arsenal, and get out there and get ready to run that against them too. So very hopeful that we come out and play well.
Arkansas also has a couple of safeties injured right now. Not sure whether they're going to get in the game or not, and how they might be able to be exploited on the back end, like you're talking about there. When you hear from Shane Beamer, when you just heard from Marcus Satterfield that you get whipped on the perimeter from an offensive standpoint when you're South Carolina against Georgia State, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I don't think the receivers must have been engaged in the run game as far as run blocking, right? Everybody has to block. You think run game, you think offensive line. Well, the blocks on the perimeter are what spring the running back to going and scoring touchdowns, right? Offensive line gets the back to the next level. The receivers have to get the running back to the end zone. And if the receivers are not engaged blocking, then you're not going to have those big explosive plays. Now, I hopped on right when you were talking about the press conference. Don't look into the words "whipped our butt" like we got outmanned or manhandled, right? It's more of it sounds like that they weren't engaged in what they were trying to do. And sometimes, you go out and you play a lesser opponent and you're not as mentally engaged as you probably should be. So hopefully we are Saturday, because, Lord knows we're going to need it.
Yeah, the numbers don't bode well for South Carolina. I think I saw pop up on social media the last time the Gamecocks went on the road and defeated a ranked SEC West opponent was in 2001. It's a difficult task for sure. And the matchup specifically in this one, I think, for most of us looking at this thing, doesn't seem like a good one, with Arkansas doing what they do so well. A guy like KJ Jefferson, who led them in rushing last year from the quarterback position, 245 pounds, just kind of a big mauler. What do you make of the Arkansas QB?
Yeah, he's grown a lot. Just watching their game on Saturday, they talked about he's lost some weight. He's a little bit more agile on his feet. He's obviously still enormous. So they're going to still run the exact same offense that they always have. But, looks like he was able to throw the ball down the field a little bit better than he normally does as well. So, from a defensive standpoint, we've got no choice. We've got to find a way to take him out of the run game. It's a difficult task because he is such a big part of it. But if we allow him to run those QB powers and then pull up and throw those quick pop passes, it's going to be a long night. They scored 31 on Saturday, and they scored a bunch against Penn State in the bowl game, and now he's a little bit more experienced. He's had a whole off season to learn and rewatch games from last year. This is a tough task, and then going down there and playing in Fayetteville, and that fan base is fired up about Arkansas football right now. They I think they're 16, if I'm not mistaken, right? Mm-hmm. Number 16. So that's going to be a packed house. It's going to be a wild environment, and we've got to be ready to go because this is already week 2. This is such a pivotal game for our season that if we go out there and win, the trajectory that it puts us on the rest of the year is it's great. We go out there and lose, and it's not as good as, maybe we had all hoped for and still hope for, right? And there's still plenty of things that we can do on the back end to make it up and still make it a great year. But when you're looking at Arkansas and Georgia, and you play a couple other smaller schools, and then A&M, those are some tall tasks that you have to get ready for. So this is an enormous game Saturday.
To me, it's a little bit more nuanced than that even. It's not just a win-loss thing, and I get it, and there's no moral victories in sports and all of that, but just from an evaluation standpoint, what I saw last year was a handful of uncompetitive games a lot of times and losses, and especially on the road. It seems difficult for Gamecock football in the last several years to even get off to a decent start enough to stay in the game very long. How does this team on Saturday start to where they can be much more competitive than what we've seen in a lot of previous games, Perry? Because the numbers aren't good at all. I think it's like 62-13 on the road in the first quarter, combined the last 5 games, something like that. And then from the first half standpoint, it's basically double that. It has not been pretty.
Yeah, we can't allow that to happen, especially this week or the next week. I know we're not playing on the road next week, but we can't afford to get down. Arkansas is a team that, from a defensive standpoint, they want you to try to go crazy, hurry up, and push it down the field because of the way they play defense. And then offensively, they want to get in a position where they're like, oh, well, I guess we have to run it here, and bleed this clock out. We don't want to get into that kind of game. We need to play early. I don't know if we have to take a shot on offense, if we have to do a trick play, if we have to come after a punt. We have to do something early to get some confidence going and to get a quick score on the board. I don't know how we do it, but it's something that has to be done because we can't allow that to happen. I guess me not thinking about it every day, now thinking back to last season, you're right. The game that comes to mind is when we went to Tennessee, and it was over before it really was started, if that makes sense. We had one shot to kind of salvage it, and we did that double pass, and it ended up getting intercepted, and it just it's tough. So we can't afford that this week.
How do you evaluate Spencer Rattler in his first game at quarterback for Carolina?
I thought it was actually really good. You take away the turnovers, and you can say what you want about him. Take those throws back. I think it's him just trying to make a play. I thought his pocket movement was incredible. He's a lot more athletic than I really thought. I mean, he can really run. He's not Johnny Manziel, but he can escape a pocket and go and get 5 or 6 yards. He's got a poise about him. He just seems calm when he's back there. He doesn't seem frantic. He's obviously got elite arm talent. I mean, that throw scrambling to the right, throwing down the sideline 45 yards. I mean, that's big time. That's the reason why he's a NFL draft prospect, is just because of his pure natural ability. I'd like to see us really allow him to do what he does and play in more of that wide open offense that he was at in Oklahoma. Obviously, you have to be a bit more balanced in this conference, but I'd like to see them open it up with him. I think it'd be good, and I think it would be good for them too. I think that we're gonna have to do some unique things offensively in order to score points and win games like this on the road.
You never got to play at Arkansas, did you?
No, I didn't. I actually never went. I've never been to Arkansas. Arkansas and Alabama were the two that I have not been to.
Well, I think it would have been much better for you, I guess, towards the end of your career, and then a couple of years after maybe is when they were down. Right now, to have Arkansas on the upswing, it seems like an extra difficult challenge. Do you have any perceptions of Sam Pittman there, their offensive line, a longtime offensive line coach, and now the head coach? To me, Shane Beamer, Billy Napier seems to be a good early fit at Florida. There are certain guys who seem to fit their jobs, and Pittman certainly is at the top of the list, I think, in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's a guy, the players love him. The players are bought into his system, and they are physical, man. That is the one thing. And whenever you have an offense or defensive line, former defensive lineman or offense and defensive line coach as the head coach, that team is going to be ultra physical. And if my number one take from or key to this game has nothing to do with certain run plays, certain pass plays, certain coverages. It has to do, if we can match the physicality of which Arkansas plays with, we're going to have a shot to win. If we don't, we are going to get run off the field. And it's as simple as that on defense. Are we going to, hate to use the old Coach Muschamp analogy because we heard it so often, but it was put your face in the fan and go make a play, go clog that hole, go run fit, go block somebody on offense, running backs, get north and south. That, in my opinion, is what's going to take us to the next level to win the game Saturday. If we do it, we're going to have a shot. If not, it's not going to look ultra favorable.
Does that come down to an effort thing, an effort or motivation thing? You're talking about getting beat on the perimeter, the engagement kind of deal, same deal?
It's a want to. It's a, you know what? You make up your mind, like, as an athlete, as a player, you're like, I'm probably going to be sore tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And this is not going to be crazy fun slamming my body in here and just getting after it. Some people love it, but you've got to do it. You've got to do it because that's how Arkansas is going to play. They have guys that are trained to play that brand of football. And that's why they've been so successful, because as we have progressed in football, everybody wants to get cute and run cute plays and spread them out and reverse this and play action RPO, bootleg, blah, blah, blah. But very few teams are still like, hey, we're going to line up and come at you. And if you want some, come and get it. If not, we're going to run you over in the process. And that's how Arkansas plays. If we can match it and tee it up with them, well, it'll make for a great game.
One more question, Perry, and really appreciate your time this morning. See that you've been at work for a little while. You're nice and stationed there. You don't even have to multitask on the way into work. When you hear from Gamecock coaches after the game, now they know a little bit more about what their quarterback, what he can take into a game, and how they need to narrow it down even more. How do you translate that from a complete outsider's view? I hear that as, I'm a little concerned possibly about the quarterback's decision-making and what they were asking him to do. Clearly it didn't work out how they had hoped it worked out. So now they're going to narrow it down that much more. That's how I heard that. How do you hear it?
Well, yeah, actually I didn't hear the quote, but to go based off of what you said, it's hard to say. Here's what I do and here's what I liked as a player. And like I said, a lot of what I base my coaching off of is what I was coached to do. We're going to start the week off with a lot of plays in practice. We are going to have, 15 to 20 pass plays and 10 run plays, right? We're going to have 10 formations. Then as the week goes on, we are going to continue to trim it back. What do we feel comfortable with going into the game? So starting on Monday, from Monday to Friday, we go from 20 pass plays to about 10, from 10 run plays to about 6. And then we just cycle those around through different formations and tagging some motions and all that good stuff. Most importantly, if you want your offense to be successful, you have to have the quarterback in a relaxed state. You have to have him confident going into the game, knowing that he knows that this game plan that you've put in front of him has plays that are going to work and help him to where he doesn't have to progress from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to find an open receiver. It can just be 1, 2, open guy, bang, balls out. Let's move on to the next play. If not, if you're throwing a bunch on him and making him make checks at the line of scrimmage and slide in protection and doing this and doing that, it just becomes cloudy. And now he's thinking and not playing. You want your guys to play. If you got to run base plays, then run base plays and let them just go and play football. Because at the end of the day, I say it all the time, cover 3 is cover 3. I don't care if you're playing Northwood Academy or you're playing the New England Patriots. There's going to be one high safety. Both corners are going to be off playing the deep third. So how can we attack that coverage in a way that our quarterback can understand it to get the ball out on time to where it's almost instinctual versus him having to go out there and process every second for a 3.5-hour football game?
there anything that Gamecock fans can look to early on in the game where you will see it and say, oh, yep, I think these boys came to play today, or nah, I'm not so sure this is going to work out?
First couple plays, both sides of the football. If we're on defense and our guys are filling and cracking their guys at the line of scrimmage, or we're running the ball and we hit a bounce and a receiver comes in and cracks a receiver. You see a couple like really big hard hits on our guys. That's when we'll be like, all right, boys are ready to go. They get the ball and they start just 4 yards, 3 yards in a cloud of dust and just pushing our guys down the field. That's when we go, oh man, not good. You'll see, you will be able to see early. You really will. We saw it last year. We saw off the bat whether or not that we were ready to go, and we'll see that same thing Saturday. I'm confident. Those guys, we got a great coaching staff. We got a great group of guys, a great group of men. I've gotten a chance to not know them, but just talk with them. I'm doing a little thing with Gamecocks Plus where I'm interviewing each position coach. We did basically all of defense a couple weeks ago and got to meet Coach Limbo this week. And he just great, the great men, great football minds. They love the kids love them. There's just a positive vibe every time I go to do a shoot over there. And I walk into the building, I'm just like, I don't want to leave right now, So they got a good thing going, man. I expect us to play well.
Good stuff, man. Really appreciate the time this morning. Looking forward to chatting with you, getting your thoughts throughout the football season as well. I know you're a busy dude. Get in there, get some work done, man.
Sounds good. Appreciate you guys. And check in on my Cardinal Newman Cardinals, man. Friday night before you go to bed, check in on us.
You're going for 7 TDs for one guy. Keep the school records coming.
No doubt. See you guys.
Former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth this morning. Good stuff from Perry as always. And what he just left us with. You're going to be able to figure out real quick whether Carolina came to play or not. It's really hard for us, I think, who talk about college football nearly nonstop, to fathom that you could put so much work and blood, sweat, and tears as a player into your football, your life, first of all, where football is such a high priority in life. And then to go to a game and not bring that ultimate enthusiasm, energy, motivation every single time. But that's what it is in college football with 18 to, you got 24-year-olds in college football now as well. It's just, just think about it in your own life, right? Work, family, whatever it is, high priorities. But every single day, you don't have the same energy, focus, motivation, whatever it is. So it does translate. I know it's just 12 Saturdays a year, and you would think, and that's the separation between the great programs, that consistency, that consistent high effort, the lack of drop off, the not playing to the competition. But it's so difficult to do. And when I hear Marcus Satterfield talk about it, when I heard Shane Beamer talk about it after the game, getting whipped on the perimeter, getting your butts beat by Georgia State in the season opener, that is hard for me to understand. When I see line play where the SEC, I couldn't tell which team was the SEC team on the field in the season opener between Carolina and Georgia State from a line of scrimmage standpoint. Once the ball was snapped. Before the ball was snapped, I could tell, right? One side is a little bit bigger than the other. But once the ball was snapped, there was no consistent extreme advantage one way or the other. And that's hard. That's hard to understand, man. It really is. And I said it earlier, and maybe it's that Georgia State teams from a conference like the Sun Belt have been able to close the gap a little bit, but that's no excuse. And that's why it's fascinating to get that matchup and now this one. Completely opposed in a lot of ways, right? Arkansas going to line it up and run it at you, and it's going to be our strength against whatever you think you can do. Here it comes. Stop it. And it's not that simple, obviously, but it is a lot of that attitude. You can just listen to Sam Pittman and, just listen to this, right? I know I played it yesterday, but just about the special teams, possible concerns about what you saw.
We have to emphasize, anytime you've done, you had a team coming in that had that much success on special teams, you better be ready for it, because they've got juice over there for special teams, and we've got to be really well prepared, which we will be.
They got some juice. To me, that's almost easier to get your team motivated, making sure that there will not be any kind of lapse in focus or lack of motivation kind of deal. Want to talk more about the offensive side of things with Marcus Satterfield being one of 3 coordinators jumping in front of the podium yesterday, or I guess he jumped behind it. It would be weird if he jumped in front of it, like left the mic behind him, just addressing the room, like a la Steve Spurrier being mad at Ron Morris back in the day. Offensive line, massive problem. Here's how Marcus Satterfield sees it.
Our offensive line can block and they can protect. It's sometimes they get beat, and sometimes it's their fault. Sometimes it's not their fault. So, we're just going to keep working, keep plugging away. I'm not down on them by any stretch. I knew that Georgia State, we're going to play bigger, faster, more athletic guys in the SEC. So I understand that, but that's a very talented defense who's got a lot of people that played a lot of football, and they move around and got on edges. We were on edges all night. So I think we'll be okay. We're just, our guys just keep working and grinding.
It doesn't exactly inspire a ton of confidence moving forward, right? But as the offensive coordinator who just saw your offensive line play like it did, you can't come out and say, no, I know this offensive line is going to handle their business the next couple of weeks taking on Arkansas and Georgia. You can't. It's an interesting spot to be in. I asked Perry his assessment of Spencer Rattler. Yesterday, we heard from Rattler himself, kind of assessing what he did well, what he didn't do so well. He said he liked how he got outside and moved the pocket, and would like to have especially one throwback. But other than that, thought it was kind of an okay type opening game performance. Very impressed just with I think how most of us are. He's the quarterback guru, right? QB1 Athletics is where you can go, by the way, if you're looking for to be trained up from a quarterback perspective by Perry Orth. But there are just certain natural gifts. I saw a former Major League Baseball player put this on Twitter one time and really appreciated the honesty. I forget who it was exactly, but it was like, a lot of people don't want to say this, but if you aren't blessed with certain natural talents, you don't have the ability to play Major League Baseball. And it's just so honest, right? We love to tell kids, no one wants to be a dream killer. We'd love to tell everyone that you can do whatever you want to do in life. But reality is you do have to be blessed with a certain ability to play at the highest of levels in sports. And so just to hear from Marcus Satterfield there about, they're going to play bigger and more athletic defenses, and it still was a challenge against Georgia State. But to hear Perry, who sees quarterbacks all the time, has seen and played against Deshaun Watson and played pretty well against him at Williams-Brice Stadium back in the day. So he has seen guys at the highest level, and he's now a high school coach and certainly seen kids at different development stages. But just to get his assessment of, that arm talent is special. That's why he's going to be a draft pick. He can move it, and he can move and throw at a high level. That was the main takeaway I got from Perry's assessment of the first game of the Spencer Rattler era at South Carolina. Here's Marcus Satterfield about his transfer quarterback from Oklahoma.
I think he played well. It was an emotional sideline. Those lights, the music, the atmosphere. It felt like a Super Bowl out there. It was amazing. I think he calmed down. He got that first completion. I told him, as me and him both, midway through the second quarter, probably started pressing a little bit, we thought this was going to be flowing a little bit more, and it wasn't. And I think we both pressed, and I think that he did some good things. Obviously, had a couple throws there that he'd like to have back, but he he's great. He came back this week and had probably his best practice today.
It's an interesting spot to be in, right? Making public comments about a guy who came in, spotlight guy, headline grabbing guy, and then to see the numbers, I think the quarterback efficiency numbers, Rattler was somewhere around 10th in the SEC. And to do that against Georgia State, for those confident that he was going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the conference, I think can only be concerning, right? But you don't want to say things publicly, be critical publicly at this stage, I'm sure, in the relationship, in the progression. And also, I'm really interested that part about pressing. That was fascinating to me, right? When you're in the second quarter and things weren't going great. I was in the stadium. You could feel it, right? My 9-year-old was just telling me, we were talking about the game yesterday, I think. And he's like, yeah, it wasn't looking great for a while. I was getting a little worried, my 9-year-old said, from the Gamecock perspective. Yeah. He knew it. But to hear the offensive coordinator say it like that when you start pressing in the game, it's honest. For sure, kind of a rare honesty. And we'll be interested to see, well, now what happens in game number 2 if things aren't going great, especially early against Arkansas. How will that translate? Because if you're pressing against Georgia State, certainly maybe that needed to happen to make sure that doesn't happen moving forward. We'll see. I'm going to go Rebel here. I'm going to call this texter Rebel in on the YouTube live chat for the first time, I believe. We beat them by 21. Can Tennessee say that? Or Auburn, who can only beat Georgia State by the grace of God? No, they can't say that. And it looks like just by the tone of that, you might be one of those getting into it with Tennessee fans or maybe even Auburn fans. Greg, the 9-year-old's going to stress no matter what. He's an oldest child. So at least he's stressing about football. He says, don't give that 9-year-old that stress this early in his life, Tim. Amen. My dad took me to my first game when I was 3 from a Gamecock football standpoint. It's a family tradition there in the Hill household. When your coordinator says he was pressing, you know things aren't going well. Yeah, DC. But we didn't have to hear that to know that things didn't go well from an offensive perspective for the Gamecocks, by and large, against Georgia State. We just had to see the game. But back to this comment. I think it's hilarious that Tennessee fans got all up in their feelings about Shane Beamer going off the field in the post-game comments on Saturday night saying, well, there are several SEC teams who can't feel this way, beating this team by 21, and Tennessee fans getting all hurt about it. Auburn fans probably as well, but I've heard mostly Tennessee fans. To me, that is such a great example, summation maybe, of how far Tennessee has fallen from where they used to be. I mean, I'm 44. For those of us anywhere close to my age, Tennessee football was way up there on the totem pole in college football, and they just have not been in the last decade or so. It hasn't been that. And I think that's a great example. If you're going to allow South Carolina's coach, who needed a couple of blocked field goals, or blocked punts for touchdowns, to handle Georgia State in the opener, and drops a pretty innocuous comment. But maybe how Kentucky fans feel about South Carolina fans getting all up in arms about the wearing dumb sunglasses, stupid sunglasses, and the culture comment that he made. And I think that's a great example of how frustrated and angry Gamecock fans are about Kentucky having passed them on the SEC totem pole. The Tennessee reaction is exactly the same. South Carolina had passed Tennessee. And I put it in past tense because we all saw last year's game. And Perry Orth brought it up in his comments, thinking about road struggles. And the Tennessee game is the largest example last year. The one game that the Carolina coaching staff would probably like to forget the most. But this matchup in Arkansas, fascinating. In a lot of ways, it's kind of house money from the Gamecock perspective. You're not supposed to win. You opened as a double-digit underdog. You didn't play well in game number 1 overall. Arkansas they were on the national stage in the first week. They beat a team that was in the college football playoff. They have a guy that is getting some national pub at quarterback. Your guy who could have continued to be a national story in game number 1 played in a way where he can now be kind of easily overlooked, I think is fair. But he changes that narrative real quick. If he goes to Arkansas and plays really, really well, Carolina somehow contains KJ Jefferson and the Arkansas run game and pulls out a massive upset win. And I say massive because it hasn't happened in this way for South Carolina since 2001, going on the road, beating a ranked opponent in the SEC West. Carolina's tradition, the history against Arkansas is ugly on the road. So you got all these opportunities. If you lose the game, you say, yeah, South Carolina wasn't supposed to beat Arkansas. And then you turn around and you're staring Georgia in the face. I get it. It's difficult, but that's what the schedule has been for a while now. You've known that's coming. I mentioned containing KJ Jefferson. Need to hear from Clayton White about that, don't we? Carolina defensive coordinator. Just like last week, his familiarity with Georgia State from his Western Kentucky days, same kind of thing with Arkansas and specifically their quarterback. Here's Clayton White.
Going against KJ Jefferson I actually went there in 2019 at Western Kentucky. He came in late. So I remember him because he was a big physical guy. And I do remember saying that's a big quarterback, and I think he's gotten bigger. He's a good player. They do a great job of designing their offense around him and his skill set. Just a big guy. I think you need more than one person to tackle him, for sure.
For sure. And I don't even know what the answer to this question is as opposed to yes or no. What would containing KJ Jefferson, instead of can Carolina contain them, what does containing KJ Jefferson look like from a numbers standpoint? And maybe it's less of a numbers thing and more of a, in the big moments, can you keep him from making those game-deciding plays? Anthony Richardson popped in my head as I was coming up with that sentence, right? In the game-deciding moments against Utah in game number 1 down in the swamp last Saturday, Anthony Richardson made the plays. That's what you need from your quarterback. That's what Connor Shaw did at quarterback for Carolina. Stephen Garcia against number 1 Alabama did. But outside of those couple examples, that's not what Carolina quarterbacks have been able to do consistently. That's what the Gamecocks are going to need from Spencer Rattler this season to have a good season. You're going to need it. And what you didn't get in game number 1, outside of what that one play that Perry was talking about, that's the one that sticks out in my mind. Protection breaks down, you roll right, throw it on the run to Jalen Brooks. It was a 39-yard gain or something down the sideline. Great catch from Brooks. You're going to need a lot more of those plays. You're going to need more of the design plays to go how they're designed. And that accuracy is going to have to be there. But containing KJ Jefferson, to me, is priority number 1. It doesn't matter how well Spencer Rattler plays. If you can't contain KJ Jefferson, not stop, that ain't happening. Carolina's not going to be able to stop Arkansas running the football. I'm talking about contain. Keep him from imposing the will on third downs. If it's 3rd and 4 and Arkansas runs the ball and picks up first downs, you're not containing him, even if he only gets 5 yards, right? So it's not a numbers thing to me. It is very much in the game deciding moments, in the big plays, you got to keep him at least 50-50, right? He's going to make some of them. He's a really good quarterback. Arkansas is a really good team. They're going to make plays. That's why it's not, can Carolina stop them? Can you contain them? Can you earn your share of them? Can Can they beat themselves on some of those plays? Can you get a bounce here or there that goes your way? That's what it's going to take, I think, for Carolina to be in the game, because that's where I'm at on this progression. And that's why it's fascinating to have this conversation. Keeping him under 100 yards, for instance, Chris says. I think that's pretty fair. But again, if he has one long run and then is pretty much contained after that and still cracks 100 yards rushing, I'd say Carolina would still contain him, right? So it's not a stats thing to me. RL says dual threat quarterbacks are hard to defend by default. It is a near impossibility for previous South Carolina teams. There is a lot of baggage there, no doubt. I would give you, I know it was early on that season, back in 2010, that was where my brain goes to, because the best dual threat quarterback, I think, in college football, the best season had was Cam Newton back in the day. And Carolina almost went out to Auburn and beat a ranked Auburn team there early in that 2010 season. And get it, KJ Jefferson is more experienced for sure. But I think everybody would say a little less talented than Cam Newton. He's a really good player, but Cam Newton, to me, from a talent standpoint and what he did that season in college football, is the gold standard. Who else do you throw in there? Tim Tebow, obviously, from a career standpoint and winning national championships. Scoring, what did he score? He scored 7. I say that out loud. I think he did. He had 7 touchdowns when he rushing and passing at Williams-Brice. I'm pretty sure it was that. That was an ugly day. Do we double down? Chris asks on the Facebook live stream and just make him beat us through the air. You can't do that, Chris. Impossible. That would be the safest bet I could ever make. Could South Carolina even do that? No, you can't. I get it. You can run blitz. You can make that your focus on defense, and certainly that will be, right? You feel a lot better about Arkansas, their chances of beating you through the air, than you do on the ground. And Carolina fans probably have baggage in this situation. Shane Beamer's got it, talking about that 2007 game where Darren McFadden, Felix Jones, Peyton Hillis just run up and down the field all night long. And Beamer told the story in the press conference on Tuesday about first quarter. Defensive coordinator on the field gets interrupted by a defensive coach in the box saying he's writing something up. He's drawing something up to contain him. And Beamer's like, oh boy, it's not going to be a good day. DC, interesting take here. I think it's a positive getting Arkansas before Georgia this year. Any other year, I would say the opposite. Why this year? York, you're way too excited about seeing my hair today. It almost makes me want to throw on a hat immediately with your comment. I don't quite get where you're going. Getting Arkansas before Georgia this year. I think getting Georgia this year, no matter where they are in the schedule, it ain't good. Are you saying maybe that this will prepare Carolina for the physicality of Georgia, or kind of working your way up to the defending national champs? I don't know. Maybe you have a better chance of beating Arkansas if you're not coming off getting beat up by other teams. I could see that, I guess. I'd say playing at Arkansas, and again, this is why house money in a lot of ways for Carolina. You're playing them at home in week number 2. I think it's much more of a season swing kind of game, right? Where you can get a win at home against a ranked opponent. A much easier thing to do, something that's happened a lot more frequently for Carolina through the years than going on the road to do it in the SEC West, especially. More of your takes from the live chat. Nick says, come out in the old Emery and Henry formation, really take it to him. With the sarcasm. Well done, sir. Get you some more comments from the Carolina coordinators from yesterday. And all 3 of them speaking. Pete Lembo was the headliner for sure, coming off of game number 1. Maybe this is the best way to put it. Maybe this is where DC was coming from about the Arkansas take. And I think this might be the thing to take away from game number one the most? Here's special teams coordinator Pete Lembo.
I thought in a lot of ways it was a great win because it was a humbling win. There was enough to walk away from to say, yes, we did some good things, but we can do so much more.
No doubt about it. And you can take it one step further, right? And Shane Beamer said it's a game that they didn't play well in a lot of areas, in his opinion. That's how college football goes, right? The ebbs and flows, especially, and maybe this is from the non-elite teams. It is very difficult to play extremely well week in and week out. I wonder how Arkansas would put that. I don't remember Sam Pittman giving kind of the generic summary of his team played well or didn't play well. I think they feel like they played relatively well in game number one, getting the win against Cincinnati. And again, that's what you would prefer as a Gamecock fan, wouldn't you? The last thing you would want was to get knocked off by a non-conference, non-SEC team in week number one at home, and then to turn around and get ready for your first conference game. I think that's the last thing you would want. But the likelihood of Carolina playing better in week number two than they did in week number one, I think is pretty good. Not from a special team standpoint. You're not going to block 3 punts for touchdowns in game number two, but just from an overall standpoint, I think that likelihood is there. But then how does that match up with Arkansas, right? Because an A game from each team, I think we all understand Arkansas wins that game. I think Carolina's going to have to play its A game. Arkansas had to play about a C game for Carolina to pull this upset. Craig says, I think the passing game is the key. I doubt we can run it on them very much. They gave up almost 350 yards passing to a new quarterback at Cincinnati. Spencer needs to have a huge day, and I think he can. Need to score 30 points. I agree with that. Comment that stood out to me yesterday was the possibility, I guess maybe even say likelihood of getting Christian Beale Smith back on the field for the Gamecocks, first time in his Carolina career after transferring over from Wake Forest, leading the Demon Deacons in rushing last year. Here's what Marcus Satterfield had to say about Christian Beale Smith, how important it could be to add him to the mix in the Carolina offense.
How much can that help the run game, just bringing a guy in who's played a lot of ball?
A lot. I mean, he's that kind of that consistent, low to the ground, like just a stump, basically. You give him the ball, he's going to move that thing forward 2 or 3 yards at worst. So just to have, again, his maturity, and, he's had a lot of experience playing at Wake, just to get him back on the field will help us tremendously, especially at that position.
Interesting to hear that. And then you got to see that, right? This is another great thing about hearing from coordinators during the season. I wouldn't have expected the answer to be quite that strong, just because how highly they've talked about Marshawn Lloyd in the past, how Juju McDowell, good player. The running back position hasn't been one of the main issues. I think the offensive line has been much more concerning over the years. Last year, you had Kevin Harris and Zaquandre White going for 100-plus yards against Florida in the same game, for instance. But to hear that Christian Beale Smith might be a big help, can be a big help from the offensive coordinator's standpoint, will be a big addition. To hear his confidence and kind of running it up there from a power standpoint, which you're going to have to do against Arkansas to keep them honest at all if you're going to be able to open anything up in the pass game. That one stood out to me from yesterday. York says, I'd like the 2-game stand after Georgia. If we pull it out against the Hogs, we can refine for 2 weeks after Georgia and move on. Yeah, I can see how you like Charlotte and South Carolina State after playing the defending national champs. DC says, imagine playing Arkansas after getting smoked by Georgia. Brutal. Okay. So from that standpoint, absolutely. You'd rather play Arkansas before you play Georgia. And Nick, no, I didn't hear a single thing about Dakereon Joyner at a press conference this week. This is odd. And Craig says, I really don't see Joyner being a factor this year. Hate to say it, but he's been passed. No, I mean, he was up on the depth chart, I think, as a as a co-starter out there at wide receiver. So I don't think that's the case, Craig. I get how you got to that conclusion, though. The numbers have not been impressive from a wide receiver standpoint. And Nick says you got to find a way to get him on the field somehow. It's a shame. You got to find a way to utilize him like you did in that bowl game, which was incredible. But I guess I should say you have to get a game like that from more than one player to win a game like this, right? It was Dakereon Joyner and Jaheim Bell. Outstanding games against North Carolina. You rode those to a win. And they did go hand in hand, right? Most of the time it was Joyner throwing to Bell. But you got massive games from one guy who hadn't done hardly anything all season long in Joyner, and another guy who I think you counted on last year, but certainly didn't do it consistently. So you got to get those combined with. So you got to get a really good game from someone who you're not expecting it coming into this game for Carolina. And by the way, Arkansas much better this week than North Carolina was going into that bowl game. And bowl game such a enigma in a lot of ways, where a program, either you're excited about it and you play really well like South Carolina did, or you're not and you don't like North Carolina did. Week 2, SEC opener, it's a different thing. So this is not quite the apples and apples comparison. And Rebel, that's incorrect. No trouble with a knee issue. It's a calf thing. So I think maybe Beamer was asked about that. And maybe you're thinking about Xavier Legette. Oh, you're thinking, I'm guessing Craig might be nominating Legette as a guy to come up, as a guy you're not expecting to have a really good game and come out and perform for Carolina. It's got to be a guy kind of like that. That would be very similar to Dakereon Joyner's out of nowhere MVP performance in that bowl game last year. You got to have something like that. Then you got to have other guys who you're counting on to play well. Spencer Rattler has to play well. Very simple. Josh Vann has to play well. Juice Wells, whoever you want to say is the Carolina number 1 receiver right now. And another part of Marcus Satterfield's press conference yesterday was just talking about how many carries that Jaheim Bell had, and that it is certainly an emphasis for this offense to give him a bunch of touches. I believe he got, was it 7 carries and 5 catches, or the opposite? I think that's what it was. He got double-digit touches in game number 1. I think that's kind of the goal. Nick saying, Stogner to the promised land, the tight end guy. Yeah, Nick's going to be our tight end guy all season long. And Craig says, yeah, Legette, surprise factor this week. It would be a massive surprise if he could step up and give you a good game. But it's a guy like that, and I see how you can get to that, right? It looks like where Arkansas could be vulnerable on defense would be on the back end, in the secondary, with the passing game being the key for Carolina. So you got to have a receiver, a tight end, a combination of both to step up if you plan on pulling the upset. I'm with you guys on that. Make sure, this is the other thing that stood out to me. We'll stay on the Carolina offensive adjustments. This is another what I feel like is a bad sign. And maybe if you want to tell me that I have South Carolina chicken curse baggage, or just too much Gamecock baggage, maybe Muschamp era baggage, fair. But when I see a coordinator who had been up in the press box, moved down to the sideline, I take that as a bad sign, man. It's just me. I don't quite get it. I mean, I get it. You want to switch it up. You think that'll help. And you do it. But maybe this is just a straight up Brian McClendon thing. It never seems to work to me. That rarely seems to be, and maybe we just because how we talk about it as much as we do. But Marcus Satterfield was on the field as the offensive coordinator for Carolina in game number 1. Didn't do that at all in year number 1. Here's what he had to say about it yesterday.
Just the communication. I mean, I've called it on the field probably more than I have in the box. So just to be down there with the guys, be down there with Spencer, be able to feel the sideline. I felt like that I wanted to be down there and be a presence on the sideline if things did go wrong, like they were, not everything was smooth the other night, just to be down there to be with the O-line, to be with the tight ends. And I loved it. I mean, got great coaches, great communication, the sideline, the communication from the, Coach Atkins is a savant up there. He's able to see a lot of things, and he's able to relay the information to me. So I think it's going to be a strength for us moving forward.
Interesting take, isn't it? It's only going to be I've never heard that, by the way. One of the strengths for that team is that their offensive coordinator is on the field as opposed to up in the box. Ultimately, fans could not absolutely care less, right? Isn't that the way it goes? If you couldn't care less, you don't give a dang. Nobody cares one way or another where the offensive coordinator is. They only care what the offense looks like, right? And Gamecock fans concerned about the offense after week number 1. They should be. You can't not be. So that was an adjustment for game number 1 that you can look to continue. Sounds like. I think it's interesting that you have your offensive line coach and Greg Atkins up top. And that way maybe he can see a little bit more than he would be able to see on the sidelines. But again, comes down to production, right? Offensive line wasn't good. Offense wasn't good. Doesn't matter who's where from a coaching standpoint. Coach them up. Get them good. Make them play better. And the traditional question was also asked to Clayton White. I don't think that's exactly what was asked to Marcus Satterfield. He was specifically asked about, I think, moving from the press box to the field. But the much more generic and typical question that you ask a coach after week 1 is, what did you learn about your team that you didn't know going in? And Clayton White's initial answer was, no, not much. I know a lot about these guys. But he did participate in the conversation and come up with an answer. And I thought it was an interesting one. And in a typical kind of understated way from the Carolina defensive coordinator, here's Clayton White asked what he learned about his defense that he didn't know before game number 1.
I learned that, when the road gets kind of tough, they kind of get closer and closer together. And, as the game's going, you realize what kind of game it is. And, listen, we have to go ahead and continue to get stopped. I think we had 7 3-and-outs. We had, 4 in a row, and we was getting in a good little groove there. I can't remember what part of the game, but we had 4 in a row at some point. And then our guys were fired up about it, and then we knew that somebody just made one play to give us some more cushion, and we just gonna keep on piling this thing on. It was fun. When they enjoyed it, they didn't want to come out the game. The starters didn't, so we had to beg some of our guys. No, I think we're good. We're up 35-14. Let's go. But
that last part, I think, is the most interesting part of that. Right? Starters didn't want to come out of the game. Well, all of what he said seems to be true, and I think coming closer together when times are tough, massively important. But also what was very true about game number 1 for Carolina, and Shane Beamer said it afterwards, he knew going in they had a depth advantage and they had a talent advantage. And it's one thing to do that, especially on defense. One thing to come close together when things are getting tough, but you have the advantage. You should be playing better. One thing not to want to come off the field when you're winning by 3 touchdowns. It's going to be a different thing if it's not going well, and in a game like Carolina has this week on the road, especially against a tough and physical team, and especially the next week going against the defending national champs. But I thought it was, if that can become what this Carolina defense is, because competition, you hear it from Shane Beamer all the time, a main tenet, a value of the program, right? Something they stress every single day, competition. And in the game, even though you're up 3 touchdowns, you want to still be in the game as a starter. That's exactly what you want your team, your program to be about. No, don't take me out, man. I worked hard to be here. I earned it. Hey, it's the best thing for the team. You got to go out now. Okay, but you got to drag me out. That's exactly what I want for my team. exactly the mindset you want from players is, all right, things aren't going well. Let's not point fingers. And Marcus Satterfield actually mentioned this, how that might have been what happened in year number one kind of thing, as opposed to coming together and taking responsibility, which a bit of concern about year number one that you never heard about at the time, right? But that's exactly the mindset of the program you want. But it's one thing to do that against a team you know you're more talented than, you know you're deeper than, you know you should beat. It's another thing to do it this week, and then especially week 3 against Georgia. I was saying what needs to happen for Carolina to win the game. Craig says probably need to be +2 in the turnover category as well. Certainly wouldn't hurt. But there should be, I'm sure there's some kind of advanced analytic about this. But for instance, Georgia Tech, first play from offense, I think it was against Clemson the other night. They take a deep shot and it's intercepted. I was doing the math. I think it was like a 48-yard punt. It was a minus 48-yard field possession thing for Clemson. So at the time, I know Clemson was all pumped up about it and the whole thing. And I don't understand why the broadcast crew didn't point it out. Like, hey, they took a shot from a field possession standpoint. If you guys have watched Georgia Tech at all in the last several years, you changed that field possession 48 yards from where you started even. That's not an awful possession. But you get a punt blocked for a touchdown. Those are different. Those are massively different turnovers, right? And so it's not just a numbers thing here, Craig. It's also an impact thing. Like the interceptions at the end of halves, when you just chuck it up and you're looking for a Hail Mary or whatever it is, those are the most worthless turnovers from a stats perspective ever, right? So not just a +2 there. It needs to be impactful. And even if you're -1, but you get the impactful turnovers and the other team doesn't, you really win that. It has much more of an effect on the game. Nick says, I'm drawing a blank on if we did this much last week, but would like to see some passes to Juju McDowell. He can be dangerous in space, need more quick hits on the passing game to work around the offensive line play. Another great point from that Georgia Tech and Clemson game, what I saw. Poor number 72, offensive lineman for Georgia Tech. They ran a bunch of screens. Clemson's got one of, if not the most athletic, productive defensive lines in the country. Brise and KJ Henry. Breezy, KJ Henry, fantastic. Just dominant players. And they dominated that game. They're the main reason to me why Clemson won as easy as they did and why they are ranked as high as they are. We can certainly go back and forth on, like Corey Miller was talking about them being overrated yesterday. Okay, if you want to say that, I'm with you. But then I need to hear who should be in front of them. Tell me Michigan definitely deserves to be ranked above Clemson right now. I'm probably not going to argue with you too much. Utah was the 7th ranked team in the country going into last week, and Florida handled them. So to me, you don't have a ton to choose from when you get outside of the teams that have consistently been in the college football playoff in the last 7 years or so. I don't know if Carolina will go to the screen game. I don't know if that's particularly when we heard Perry talk about Arkansas being mainly a 3-man down front. I think we talked about, I don't know if it was Marcus Satterfield or Shane Beamer talk about how they switch. They switch it up. Sometimes they're 3, sometimes they're 4. They've done multiple games recently both ways. But we'll know pretty soon during the game whether Carolina thinks the screen game is an effective play call against that defense. We saw Georgia Tech and Clemson. Georgia Tech's offensive coordinator Chip Long certainly thought that was the best way to neutralize that defensive line for Clemson, to keep them from pinning their ears back and coming after the quarterback and the whole thing. That poor number 72 offensive lineman, though, I kept waiting for him to, to me, it's like licking your lips and putting it on a silver platter is exactly what you want as an offensive lineman getting down the field. You want to smash those little guys. And it seemed like this poor guy was already out of breath, like 3 steps down. And once he finally got anywhere close to someone, it was just like all it could take was just, he didn't have any energy to do it. or any want to do it. I don't know what it was. It was so frustrating I felt bad for that guy. So frustrating to see. I think from an offensive line standpoint, you get those opportunities, man. You got to take advantage. I feel like that is where you can really make a reputation for yourself, where it is rare that the kind of spotlight's on you. The ball right behind you, you're right in there. Everybody can see it. And it just multiple times either whiffs or just ineffective from the Georgia Tech standpoint. But I guess I should have expected that. RL says, as long as we're not replacing the offensive coordinator in the booth with a green grad assistant. Yeah, that wasn't going to happen. So last year you had Marcus Satterfield sitting beside Eric Kimry up in the booth, the tight ends coach at the time. Not sure where this year's tight ends coach was during the game, but did hear that Greg Atkins is kind of the guy that Satterfield really relied on, says is a savant up in the box. That's one thing to say. Then you got to see the results of it, right? That's another thing to keep an eye on, Ryan, for sure. Does Georgia State beat North Carolina at home on Saturday? I think so, Ryan says. Well, I can tell you this. If Georgia State does that after North Carolina gave up 40 in the fourth quarter to Appalachian State, Sean Elliott deserves all the credit in the world, right? I think you got to see that near Georgia State and you say, come on, man. Why couldn't they have just sealed the deal there, been feeling extra good about themselves, have people patting them on the back all week? Like, that's what you want from an opposing team, not to be a national story. Hey, look how this team that has a national championship coach who felt the need to do the Antonio Brown dance afterwards. Look at this team giving up 40 in the fourth quarter and almost massively choking away a game. Rebel, very chatty this morning. Love it, man. Georgia Tech scored more points on Clemson than their last three matchups from last season. Like Corey said, overrated. Okay, we'll see. I think that's a lot to take away from week number one. I will certainly agree that Clemson didn't look impressive 2.5 quarters of that ball game, but then they did. And then they look like what they had been. That defensive line looks like what it has been. Cade Klubnik looked like a quarterback that has played quarterback at a high level for Clemson in the last few years. It was against Georgia Tech, who was already beat down. Don't get me wrong. I understand where Corey's coming from. I'm not willing to go as strong as he was yesterday. And if you missed that, you can check it out on the YouTube page. We got the show segments playlist. If you ever just want to ingest the show, do you ingest it or digest it? I don't know. If you ever want to watch the show in smaller pieces, you can always go there to the YouTube channel. Let's get back to some more coordinator comments from yesterday. And this goes back to, I think it was DC, who left a comment before the show even started, talking about it was a must-watch press conference. Pete Lembo is my favorite assistant kind of thing. Again, to me, you can say whatever you want to as a special teams coordinator the week after blocking 2 punts for a touchdown. Fans are going to love you. But this comment I thought was really interesting. And it made me think that Pete Lembo might be a Dennis Rodman type character within the building. I'll explain after you hear from the Gamecock special teams coordinator here.
Everything matters. That's one thing I've learned doing this a long time, that everything matters. And I'm sure there are times, whether it be our assistant coaches or our players, probably look at me and say that I'm, off the charts anal about some stuff. But there's a reason, because, you don't get reps back and you don't get time back. And every second that you have is an opportunity to get better. So that stuff definitely pays off on Saturday afternoons and Saturday nights.
How in the world could that guy, you just saw him, especially on the video portion of the show, be compared to Dennis Rodman at all? Well, what I was hearing there is that it sounds to me like he's had some interactions in the past where guys get a little annoyed with what he's doing, right? And don't you feel like there is that guy in almost every situation? That guy. Pete Lembo sounded like that guy right there, right? Everything matters. You got to pay attention to the details every time, every single second. Like at some point, you're like, hey, man, relax, right? Well, Dennis Rodman was never like that personality necessarily, but he was always that guy. If he was on your team, you loved him. If he was on another team, you hated him. But he was always doing the little things, doing the dirty work. Got to have a guy like that to be successful. Michael Jordan knew that. That's why they went out and got him with the Chicago Bulls back in the day, and they won 3 championships when they did. Well, Pete Lembo, obviously not a player, not doing the dirty work as a player. It sounds like he's doing the dirty work in a lot of ways as an assistant coach, making sure nothing falls between the cracks and always pointing that out. Always, probably to most players and even coaches, annoyingly pointing that out. But you got to have that guy. And clearly, his work paid off Saturday night in a massive way. Chris says, Limbo's a fan of history and Seinfeld. LOL. Yeah, that's what you take away from yesterday's press conference. Good combo. DC says a frustrating game like last week can flip the switch on some guys. Going to take max effort across the board. And the humbling win comment from Limbo, kind of right with that, played a little bit earlier on in the show. Feels like game 1 was a humbling win, a good win, but a humbling win. Plenty to coach up after that sucker. And I don't know how you would see it any differently as a coach, how you could see it any differently, even as the special teams coordinator that got so many big-time plays on the fake field goal, on the 2 touchdowns, block punts. Max, good to hear from you, Max. Says, I'm a realistic person. Well, maybe that's why you're in on the show here. I feel like this is a realistic show, right? Not idealistic or overwhelmingly optimistic or pessimistic. Try to be right down the middle, right? Try to be as realistic as possible. So interesting to hear that too. I feel like when people tell me that, then I question it. That's just me, maybe being a skeptical guy. Max says, I'm a realistic person. I know things will change across the season, but Clemson's offense in the first half of their game looked equal to or worse than our offense against Georgia State. I don't disagree with that. I think that's a pretty fair comparison. I'm wondering what the spread would be if Georgia Tech played Georgia State. Who's Georgia Tech favored in that game? If they are, I don't think it's by more than a touchdown. To you? That's fascinating to me. And in comparing week ones, and Corey Miller was pointing out yesterday how he thought they were very similar games. And Max, I think that's realistic. Haven't heard from our resident Clemson fan Troy today. Be interested in getting his take on that one. I think he's been known to be more pessimistic. Certainly the comments about Brad Brownell anyway. Maybe he would agree with that. Nick, yards after contact might be a stat to watch this week on defense. Feel like there's so many times last year we had a great stop on D, then on third down we'd have a guy with the tackle or get dragged 6 yards. That's a really good point, but I think it's not just on defense. That's going to be both ways, right? Especially with the likelihood of a couple of experienced guys, a couple of starters at safety being out for Arkansas in this game. The likelihood that R.J. Roderick won't play, which is how I'm reading the situation. Carolina coaches haven't put it quite like that, but to me it sounds like that Nick Emenwari, the true freshman, will see a lot of time again. Might end up starting the game. Might end up, I think they said last week, when you add the special teams plays in, he was on the field more than anybody for Carolina football. True freshman from Irmo, who Shane Beamer said after the game, they didn't beat anybody out in recruiting to get. And then DQ Smith was playing beside him a couple of times, another true freshman from Columbia that Carolina beat Georgia Southern out in the recruiting game for. So for any of you who might be big-time recruiting people, that's another great example of how it's not the end-all be-all. More from yesterday from Pete Lembo. The everything matters. Again, being that guy. You got to be that guy. But he also gave us, I think, just from a fan perspective, a little insight. He says he tells his players this all the time. And this was interesting, too, from the coach's standpoint. This is not just evaluating special teams as a special teams coordinator, but evaluating a team at large, a football team or program in college football. And I think this applies more to college than it does to the NFL. The NFL guys are pros. It's a little bit different. It's not the same thing. It's not the same relationship between players and effort that it is in the NFL. In the NFL, you don't give your best effort, you don't have a job. So it's just different. But I really found this comment interesting from Pete Lembo about how he evaluates a team, or one thing that you can look for, one key little play in a game that you can look for to have a big takeaway from a team or a program.
Watch the last PAT field goal of a game and how hard their PAT field goal block unit goes, and that'll tell you a lot about a football team. Watch the last kickoff of a game, maybe when they're up 28 points, and how hard the guys are covering. That'll tell you a lot about a football team. And I will tell you this is a tough, rugged, hardworking, high-effort football team that we're playing, and they've got excellent coaches.
Now, you would expect a coach at a press conference to say that about the opposing team, right? But something to keep in mind, I've never heard it put exactly like that. And I think it applies a lot more in college than it does in the pros, and it applies a lot more, I think, to the non-championship level teams. If you're on Alabama special teams or Clemson special teams, you're winning the game by 45 points. I don't think it really applies. I think those programs, throw Georgia in there, throw Ohio State in there. They've proven week in and week out, you're going to get a really good college football team. Rarely are you going to be able to catch them. But almost everybody else in college football, they can get got. For whatever reason, their programs aren't set up. They haven't risen to the level of really, really high, consistent play every single week. And it's that key you can look for, that kind of crack in the foundation, maybe is a good way to put that. Like, hey, I saw that. That means, to Pete Lembo, that there are effort differentials. Let's put them that way, right? And that's why the explanation that I heard from Perry, or that the assessment you hear from Shane Beamer or Marcus Satterfield getting whipped on the outside, on the perimeter in game number 1, from an offensive standpoint, is so, I think, I don't know if concerning is the right word, but so difficult to understand. You're an SEC wide receiver. You're an SEC tight end. You should be able to block Sunbelt guys. Goes back to Corey Miller's take yesterday. You're an SEC offensive lineman. You're playing against the Sunbelt team. You should be able to control the line of scrimmage. And Carolina didn't do that. I don't know if it's more concerning that it's an effort thing or it's a talent thing. You probably prefer it to be an effort thing, right? Because that means you can fix it and get higher play out of your guys. But that's still massively concerning, man. If you gotta motivate your players to play harder in a season opener. You only got 12 games a year, man. If I would assume if we got to hear from Justin Stepp, I had to do it in my head there, the Twins, and Josh used to be at Georgia State, now at Louisville. If you got to hear from Justin Stepp, the wide receivers coach, I would assume you're hearing, that was embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for my guys. An embarrassing performance on the outside because we got our butts whipped by Georgia State. If you got to publicly, that's the assessment for the coaches. They didn't hold back from that, right? Shane Beamer after the game, and then Marcus Satterfield yesterday. got our butts whipped on the perimeter. How that happens, I difficult to understand, man. Like, it can't. Is it just poor coaching going in? I mean, no way that the Georgia State defensive back coach just had their guys completely coached up much better than the Carolina outside guys, and they were able to take advantage of a technique or something like that, right? Just got to be an effort thing, and that's hard to understand. Let's see what we got here. We've got some numbers in from RL. He says Georgia State would be a 9-point favorite, in my opinion, RL, if Georgia State was hosting Georgia Tech. Better defense and running game? Come on now. I think that's a little large. North Carolina is a 7.5-point favorite at Georgia State this week. Interesting there. I bet that over-under number is pretty large. The team says they can't wait to go hit someone else. Then when Georgia State's in front of you, you can't block them on the perimeter. That's disturbing. That's effort, Craig says. I don't know how to see it any other way. I haven't heard a different explanation there. It is. It's hard for me to understand. And that makes me think that maybe it's being overstated a little bit, trying to protect the offensive line. I don't know. That was interesting for sure. Again, the special teams, the headliner week number 1 for the Gamecocks. You got to think you're going to go pull off an upset at Arkansas. You're going to need another play on special teams or 2, or maybe more. But didn't get to it yesterday. I thought it was fascinating. I don't think I got it to it in yesterday's show anyway. Shane Beamer talking about special teams and specifically punt philosophy. And I never heard it put this way, and he just kind of went into a bit of a tangent, and I thought it was fantastic and a really interesting insight into the mind of Shane Beamer, kind of X's and O's guy or football coach that doesn't necessarily get credit for being a guy who really understands the game. Here's Shane from Tuesday's press conference talking about the effect that a punt team can have.
When you're a better rush team, that makes you better as a return team because people are worried about getting punts blocked. So they either got to keep extra people in protection, or they really got to stay in longer in order to protect, which therefore makes it better for now you to return that punt, because we talk about our players. It's really the longest play in football. If you think about it, it takes from snap to punter 2 seconds to get the ball off. If the punter's any good, it's going to be in the air 4 or 5 seconds. So right now you're talking 7 seconds before the returner even catches the ball, and then however long it takes. So, I mean, you're talking about a play that's anywhere from 12 to 15 seconds. And the more that teams are worried about protecting, that makes it easier on Josh Vann and our returners back there because there's not as many people down there, and you can get some returns going. That's why my dad was so good on special teams, because they were so good at blocking. People were worried about that, and next thing you know, they were turning them for touchdowns. And then you're trying to get more people out in coverage to keep them from returning them for touchdowns, and now you're blocking punts again. So that's what we want to be at all times. Sorry, I went on a special teams like spiel right there.
You just feel how much he loves that stuff, right? I'd never heard it put that way before, but it makes a lot of sense, and it explains to me a lot of the ways that my mind, for some reason, kind of went back to Steve Spurrier, who always talked about how you gotta get scores on defense or special teams if you're really going to blow people out. And then Shane's statement after the game Saturday night saying they knew they had a depth and talent advantage going in against Georgia State. Well, Florida teams also had those. Virginia Tech teams had those against non-conference opponents especially. Carolina had that Saturday night. The way that you can really exploit that is in special teams, right? And that happened. To have not seen that happen through the years at South Carolina, Will Muschamp was never able to figure that out. He prides himself, still does, being a defense special teams kind of guy. But you got to show your advantages there. I think that's why you've seen more and more in college football, better players play on special teams, because the importance is kind of stressed and you're looking for an advantage. And Shane Beamer kind of started, I think, that rant by saying they're always looking for an advantage, looking to steal a possession, I think is how he put it specifically. Every single game, however they can. And to hear him put it like that from a special teams standpoint, from a punt standpoint specifically, really interesting. Daddy-O says even just gaining an extra 15 to 20 yards on a lesser protected return adds up. And yeah, it added up in the wrong way so many times in the Will Muschamp era, right? Where he didn't even trust guys to go back there and catch the dang thing. But threw Hayden Hurst back there one game as a punt returner. And again, I think that kind of goes into the head coaching mindset. Brian Kelly was trying to explain, I think, why he put his punt returner back there against Florida State, who he had to explain it because he dropped two. He said, yeah, we put guys in positions in practice, and we had confidence in him to make the plays. Clearly, we got to go back and evaluate that again, basically saying, you're fired, right? You lost our trust. You dropped two in a game and nearly single-handedly lost us that game. So you lost your job, man. But we'll take the blame because it was our job to evaluate it. I mean, that's how that works. So now, with what happened in game number one, I think that led to Pete Lembo's comment here about the feeling around Carolina special teams in general. And this one, I would say, whoa, all right, I understand where you're going. You might want to pump the brakes a little bit on this. I'll explain after you hear from special teams coordinator Pete Lembo here.
I love the fact that we are building something here and that everybody involved in our program, because I believe very much like Shane that this is a very inclusive, not exclusive program. We want everybody who wants to be a part of this thing to feel like they're a part of this thing. So we obviously have a head coach who's very easy to get to know and very approachable, and I'd like to think I'm very much the same way. And so if we are building something here that is taking on a life of its own, like Coach Beamer did at Virginia Tech for all those years, then that's awesome. And that makes it all that much more exciting for me to come to work every day, for our staff to be involved with this. And not that I have a lot of time to read a lot of quotes from our players, but our players are starting to really get excited about this stuff. When you have freshmen coming in and they're talking about it, and you have fifth-year seniors who may not even be on it who are talking about it, it's starting to take root, right? And that's what we want.
Interesting stuff. Even to mention, so both of those guys, this was Tuesday at Shane Beamer's press conference where he mentioned his dad and the ability that Virginia Tech had to be so good in special teams, earned the nickname Beamer Ball by blocking punts, then being able to return punts, and how that relationship, just the potential to be able to block a punt, can sometimes help you set up a punt return. And then Pete Lembo, what you just heard there, mentioning it as well to earn the reputation, to get guys excited about it. I understand. 2 block punts for a touchdown is fantastic. Plus 50-yard field goals for a first-time field goal kicker, tremendous. But especially from the punt block situation, you got to do it now in SEC play. Virginia Tech didn't get that reputation for doing it against non-conference opponents where they were deeper and more talented. They got it for doing it in big-time games that helped them become one of the best teams in college football. And so now that's the next step for Carolina. That's what you're seeing this week. First of all, you get the opportunity, right? You get the opportunity to do something South Carolina football hasn't done in more than 20 years. Go on the road and beat a ranked SEC West team. Mississippi State, the first game after 9/11, the last time that happened. So the opportunity to do that is there. But the challenge is that much greater against a team where you don't have a talent or depth advantage. I'd say at best you're even. That Gamecock guy podcast weighing in says at least to be able to be down on the field and feel the game, be able to talk eye to eye to players. He's talking about the offensive line or the offensive coordinator move from the press box to the sideline. Been watching and think Freddie Kitchens should be in the box and Satterfield on the field, at least to be next to the head coach to talk, to be able to be eye to eye with the team. Yeah, Freddie Kitchens, former NFL head coach, offensive analyst or analyst for the team. Probably a good guy to keep up in the box. Good point. I'm sure he's up there. Can we never mention Will Muschamp again? I just got triggered, Craig says. Sorry, Craig, get over it. I can't promise you that. I will try not to go out of my way to do it, though, just to make you mad. Is that fair? Chris says, hopefully Jeter will live up to that last name and be clutch. I think he already has, hasn't he? What else you want to see, man? 2 50-plus yard field goals in your debut as the field goal kicker? That was pretty clutch. And at the time, really needed those field goals, right? It could have been really deflating because you saw the Muschamp era, Craig. It was a great example of trotting your field goal kicker out for plus 50-yard field goals time and time again, missing those field goals, and everyone in the stadium saying, what is that guy doing? What is that head coach doing? And Parker White had the leg. He just didn't have the accuracy. And Will Muschamp believed in him, and it just didn't work out consistently. Yes, Mitch Jeter has taken over Parker White's job because Parker White left school after being the kicker for 12 years. It seemed like 12. John, welcome in. John Frew says he knows he's late. Good morning, everybody. John's been going through some health stuff. Glad you're with us this morning, John. If you're doing it from the hospital, I'm extra impressed / a little worried and appreciative, maybe is the best way to put that, but certainly thinking and pulling for you, sir. Hope you're back to 100% real soon. Glad you're a part of the program. Wanted to touch on this, and we've talked Gamecock football almost exclusively, college football for sure, for about an hour and 45 minutes, a little bit more than. A couple other notes. Braves winners yesterday, and yet fell out of first place. How about that? Don't see that happen often. The Mets had a doubleheader. They won both games, went into the day tied with the Braves. So the Braves won early on yesterday. Mets won their early game, so they were still tied. And then the Mets won game number 2 against Anthony's Pirates. Thanks a lot, Anthony, there. And a 7-game win streak got you a half game out of first place yesterday from the Atlanta Braves standpoint. That happens. Rare, but it happens. It can't happen. John, listening in from your hospital bed, sending me to MUSC in Charleston. Oh, man. A little extra special thoughts and prayers headed your way then, John. And really appreciate your show support from the hospital bed, man. Roger, Muschamp is gone, but not forgotten. Hard to forget that deal. Daddy, no, you're not kicker you. Maybe if Parker White and Elliott Fry were doing it in the NFL, absolutely. Ryan Suckup being the guy for as long as he has, absolutely. Greg's triggered again. Now, I think Roger might have just done that on purpose. Good job. Hope you can, again, back to full strength in no time. I'm glad you can participate in the show. How you're doing it, sir. Remain connected. So I mentioned the Braves, half game out now in the NL East. And then did you guys see this mess, I think is the best way to put it, this stuff with Dawn Staley and South Carolina politicians? So the story goes, the original story was a BYU volleyball player, a Duke volleyball player playing at BYU said there were racist comments shouted at her and her teammates, and that BYU didn't handle it immediately, I think was kind of the main issue there, and made it very public. And BYU eventually did an investigation. I think actually they during the game, I think they sent security there and ended up kicking a fan out. Well, now there's been an investigation done. Apparently the fan who was kicked out had special needs and the investigation from BYU police and the athletics department, I think they came up basically saying there was no evidence that there were these things being said. I don't know what kind of evidence there could have been. I guess there was no corroborating witness to confirm that what was said was actually said, I think is maybe the disturbing part of the investigation. But in response to this situation, you guys probably saw that South Carolina women's basketball the last several days canceled their home-and-home series with BYU. Dawn Staley saying at Darlington, where she was driving the pace car the other day, that she slept on it and she didn't feel right putting her players in a position to be the victims of what the Duke volleyball player was a victim of. Well, now South Carolina lawmakers are coming back and saying, wait a second, what's going on here? What's the policy moving forward? You basically canceled BYU. What about the presumption of innocence until proven guilty? You didn't let things play out. How is this going to affect things moving forward? It's a mess. We all know that politics sometimes it crosses with sports for sure. Dawn Staley was clearly making a statement here that she was not going to put her players in a compromising position, and this was a really public statement to punish BYU, who was responsible for a fan or the environment that they create, I guess, at home, which is kind of wildly ironic that you remember that whole Missouri basketball thing when the Missouri AD was accusing the South Carolina environment for being racially insensitive, I think at the time, and their players being unsafe and the whole thing. And that was wild. But now to have this kind of flipped in a lot of ways, and this goes to the issue of getting canceled in 2022. And I saw what Outkick did an article about this and says that the South Carolina women's basketball program and South Carolina department or athletics department virtue signaling by canceling these games. And the problem that I see with this thing is there can be a smoking gun. I guess there could be, if you're demanding the burden of proof, I guess would be the right phrase, right? To be a tape where you can clearly hear something as being said, or I don't know what you want here, what you need to believe that the player heard what she heard. But that seems to be a ridiculously high burden of proof that you need an investigation to unearth like physical evidence of that this was actually said. If you need an eyewitness, well, how many do you need then, right? Now, if the problem though becomes if you got nothing on the other side of that, could it have been mistakenly heard and mistakenly taken, right? And then we don't want a world where you can hear something wrong and then there are repercussions for an entire athletics department or sports program, sports team, whatever, any people kind of associated with that, and you're overreacting that way, right? It's a weird spot, weird issue, weird situation. I understand where Dawn Staley's coming from for sure. I understand where these lawmakers are coming from. In this situation, though, I don't feel like it had to come to this, right? I don't know. It's just where we are in 2022, I guess, right? That you can stand up for things that you feel like you need to stand up for, and they can have real-world implications real quick. And then it becomes somebody else gets involved and says, wait a second, what's going on now? Because the lawmakers are pointing out in their letter to Ray Tanner, Don Staley, the athletics department there, well, what's now the policy moving forward? If a fan base says something, what does it have to be to cancel the series and the whole deal? And look, I'm all for standing up against cancel culture in general, right? But I'm also all for standing up against racism and anything that gets close to that. We all understand those are both wrongs. But I don't understand how we get to the right thing in this situation. I don't know how we can, if it's possible, to get to the right thing. Maybe the right thing in this situation is bringing attention to it and talking about it. Maybe that's the way we move forward better out of this. I don't know. But weird that South Carolina lawmakers would get involved, like they're overly concerned about the BYU athletics department. But I guess because it's the University of South Carolina, you can do that politically. 2022, man. Yeah, and while we're on the subject, RL says, congrats to Asia Wilson, her second WNBA MVP. And I don't know what you saw, a video of it a week back in Duke volleyball. It was some type of clip that's on YouTube, but I don't think there is a clip that definitively says, yes, this is what it was and what it sounded like, and you can hear it right here. But again, I think that burden of proof is way too high. If someone says they heard something like that, I think you automatically believe them as opposed to the opposite. And that's why I think it's weird, that whole innocent until proven guilty. Well, that's a court of law thing. No one's getting arrested here or sent to prison. This is a series of games that got canceled. That's why it's weird from the lawmaker side here. Daddy-O says, not the first time Dawn has virtue signaled. Well, one person's virtue signal is another person's standing up for injustice, right? And I get it. If that injustice never happened, then that's a problem. But I think we all come at it from much different places about how much proof you need of that. And to demand a high level of proof, I think is over the line. I think canceling the series was probably over the line as well. Strong statements both ways. I think a little too strong from where I sit in this situation. But hopefully some good can come out of this. Some movement away from cancel culture, and certainly a movement away from anything that deals with racism. Just thought I'd throw that out there, man. It's in the headlines, I know. And it's just a weird, complicated kind of issue. Everywhere has knuckleheads, right? Daddy-O says that's never going to change. Yeah, but that doesn't excuse it. Though folks' thoughts on Dawn are sometimes heavily influenced by their politics, no doubt. No doubt about it. Can't make one bad fan ruin the whole university, BW says. Yeah, there's that too. So, complicated thing. I'll be interested to see what ends up coming out of this, if anything. But just the latest example of politics and sports kind of crossing lines, the University of South Carolina being involved in that. So, thought it was appropriate to bring it up on the show, part of the unrestricted free agent part of this show. We can talk about whatever needs to be talked about in the necessary ways. Today, that was mostly football, right? It is September 8th, and Carolina is about to play Arkansas, number 16 team in the country, on the road on Saturday. Tomorrow's show should be a lot of fun. We'll look at college football at large. Not a great weekend on paper, but we'll get into some of the other matchups, what that might mean, kind of like we were talking about Georgia State and North Carolina just a little bit today, what that might mean for how you see your team or other teams around the country as well. Roger says, enjoy the show as always. Have a great Thursday, everybody, with a smiley face. How about that? Not a sun emoji today. Anthony, great job today, Tim. Appreciate that. That'll do it for the show in a weird, awkward silence as I was looking to make sure we got in all the comments today. Appreciate all you guys on the live chat. However you ingest the show, however you take it in, it is greatly appreciated. The support on this thing makes it a lot of fun. And especially football season. We're really getting things rolling now. Appreciate Perry Orth joining us today at Perry Orth 10, where you can find him on social media. Hit him up at QB1 Athletics with an underscore in there on the Twitter handle as well. Perry's set to join us weekly throughout the football season to get his unique perspective on things. Hearing him pretty impressed with Spencer Rattler. Going to be wildly interested to hear his quarterback perspective next week with KJ Jefferson set to go against the Gamecocks as well. Stay blessed all, RL says, and BW. Thanks, TH. Keep bringing the fire. Will do, sir. Or ma'am. Will do. That'll do it. September 8th, unrestricted free agent in the books.